Hi, I'm Rosário. I'm a developer expert for Firebase, and in this video I'll show you how Firebase Authentication, Cloud Firestore, and Remote Config can make a powerful combination for your video game. Now, I'll assume that you already know how to create a Firebase project and how to add Firebase to your game, but in case you don't, you can check the links that I left in the description below. So let's have a look at some common problems that game developers may face. Your players may want to save their scores and access them across different devices. Your players may want to see the score of other players. Some players may complain that your game is too difficult, while others complain that it's too easy and you can find a middle term. First, let's have a look at authentication. Firebase Authentication is a tool that allows you to easily provide sign-in and sign-up functionalities to your users. It also allows you to verify the identity of your users and keep their data secure. Firebase Auth supports different sign-in providers such as email and password, phone authentication, Google Sign-in, Facebook Login, and many more. In this video, I'll be showing how to use the Google Play Games provider since this is the mostly common used provider in mobile games. First, you need to go to the Google Play console and request a credential. Once you do that, you'll receive an XML file that looks like this. Save it to the res/values directory in your project. Now that we have Play services set up, let's write the code in our app. The first step is to initialize our provider and activate it as shown in this code snippet. And then, whenever the user wants to sign in, we call this authenticate method, and if it is successful, we'll receive an authentication code. We can then exchange this code for a Firebase credential. And once that's done, our user should now be signed in. Now we can check if a user is signed in by using this code in any screen of our game. And we can also retrieve the unique ID as shown here. Going back to our problems list, we still haven't solved any of those problems, but we actually took a huge step towards that goal, because now we are able to distinguish our players by their unique ID. So now that we can verify their identity, let's save their scores, and for that we can use Cloud Firestore. Cloud Firestore is a NoSQL document database that lets you easily store, synchronize, and query data for your mobile and web apps. If you are coming from a relational database background and you've been using SQL databases, you might be wondering what are the tables, the columns, and rows. But because Cloud Firestore is a NoSQL database, instead of tables we actually have collections and documents. You can think of collections as tables and think of documents as rows. But the main difference you'll find is that you can't exactly create relationships between collections. I know this might seem like a lot to understand at the beginning, but you get used to it once you actually start using Firestore. So let's have a look at the code we need to save our user score. First, we need to create a class to represent the user score. In this example, I only want to save the username and their total score, but you're free to add any other field that you need, such as the level where the user got that score, for example. Next, we need to have a collection. In this example, I'll create the collection scores, and each user score will be a document under that collection. We'll use the user's unique ID as the document ID so that we can easily distinguish the scores for each user. And after running this code, here's what it will look like in our database. See this string with random characters? That's our user's unique ID. Every unique ID in Firebase Authentication looks like this. Notice that we have a collection named scores, we have a document with the unique ID, and this document has the fields score and username. Now, we might want to read this user score. We can do that by creating a reference to our scores collection, and with that reference create a reference to our user's document by specifying his UID, which we got from Firebase Auth. And finally, we call getSnapshotAsync. This should give us a document snapshot, if it exists, which we can easily parse to our userScore class and then display it on our UI. And with this, we have solved the first problem of our list. Now, let's try and create a leaderboard. In order to create a leaderboard, we can use the same reference to the scores collection. But this time, instead of referencing our document, we simply call getSnapshotAsync on the collection itself. But before that, we need to add this order by descending query so that Firestore can pre-sort the list of scores before delivering to our device. That way, we can receive a query snapshot which we can then iterate through to display each user score in our game. So that crosses off our second problem. Now, let's jump into the final one, which can be solved with Remote Config. Remote Config allows you to change some of your game's parameters without actually publishing a new version. This means you can have better control over your game's behavior with no effort required from your users. You can also use Remote Config to run experiments and test some ideas. Let's say we have a car game and each round has a time limit. It's a time-based game. We might want to quickly change the car's speed if our players complain that the car is too slow, or even change the time limit if players complain that the time is not enough. So this is what Remote Config looks like in the Firebase console. We'll create two parameters, one for time and one for car speed. Notice that we need to set a default value for them, and optionally we can leave a description to remind us what that parameter is used for. Now that we have both values on the Firebase console, let's add them to our game. After adding the Remote Config SDK to your game, you'll need to set some default values that Remote Config should use in case the device is not connected to the internet and the game cannot load the parameters from Firebase. And now the time limit and car speed parameters can be used by calling getValue. Now let's say we need to increase one of these parameters. We can go back to the Firebase console, update its value and publish the changes. All players' devices will fetch the new configuration within 12 hours, as that's the default behavior. But if you need to reduce this fetch interval for any reason, you can actually do it by using the code shown here. Setting the minimum fetch interval to 0 will allow you to get updates instantly, and it's actually a perfect way to debug your remote config setup, but I don't recommend using this in production. And with that, we have just solved our final problem. Now that we've solved all of these problems, you might be asking yourself, how much am I paying for this? And my answer for you is almost nothing. Let me break down my answer for you by showing the price of each of these products. Firebase Authentication is a free product for most of the sign-in providers that it offers. But if you use phone authentication, you'll have a free limit of 10,000 verifications a month, and after that, you'll start paying a very small amount per verification. Cloud Firestore has a huge free quota. You can store up to 1 GB total, and you have some limits for write, read, and delete operations, as you can see in this page. If you need more than 1 GB, you can then upgrade to the Firebase Blaze plan, which charges you around $0.1 per GB. If you want to know more about the Firestore prices, you can check the Google Cloud pricing page. Finally, Remote Config is 100% free, so you don't really need to worry about any charges when you're thinking about changing the car speed in your awesome video game. If you are someone who prefers to see some actual code instead of reading the documentation, I recommend checking out the open source Mecha Hamster game on GitHub. It uses Firebase Authentication, Firebase Database, Cloud Messaging, Remote Config, and other tools that I haven't mentioned in this video. So I'm sure you'll learn a thing or two by exploring the code and playing the game. And that is all that I had to share in this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to learn more about Firebase, you can check the links in the description below. See you next time.